back over here. I don't think it's working, Luke, because the.
I know.
Where'd he go? Similar guy driving it.
We got a fuzziness here.
I know. Just because I can't see the contrast on the screen. We're going to turn the lights off. Once it sees contrast, it'll focus.
Shiloh, can you turn off the front light, please? Right now it's only showing. Okay, oh, there we go.
See, it just can't see contrast to focus with.
All that shape now.
Go to that other one.
What's that? What's that?
Yeah,
Go to the other one.
Well, I got lots of
Nice. Unless I get this guy from the sheriff, save you some money.
Yep. We're good.
Road shows it is.
Yep.
Want to introduce?
Yeah, I can introduce.
Thank you.
They told us within 5 minutes.
Or like 20.
Good, how are you?
Well, good morning.
No, I did it on purpose. I'm here for you.
I don't need to stand anywhere yet. Today we've got a great opportunity with a couple of great presenters today for our Leadership Academy. I think you guys are just going to really get some great takeaway information on here today. I think everybody here probably knows our fire department chaplain, Roy Gruber, who's been with us now for a few years, and Roy's been out. We've had him out quite a bit lately. And I think this shift just had him out. And he's been coming out on Thursdays and riding and kind of coming out to meet with everybody. And so we talked a little bit, because we've been kind of dealing with some of these things lately. I thought it might be great to go over some things on grief and how we deal with families and process it ourselves and deal with that. So I've asked Roy to do that. The other presenter today is Jimmy Pitts, who is the chaplain for the Weber Fire District. Both of them are pastors up at Washington Heights, and so they do have a working relationship outside of this. So they'll have a good time presenting together today. And Jimmy I heard about this presentation he did at Weber on the 5 love languages and talked about relationships, and I heard how amazing it was, and so I thought what a better opportunity than to see if we could kind of combine the two, take the morning and go through this information for everybody here today. So it'll be kind of two totally different topics. But I think
grief and
well,
relationships.
that's a good point. But I think both these are really timely. I think they're going to be great. I think we're going to get a lot of great takeaway from that. So anyway, that's
all right. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you all for being here. And I'll be honest, a little intimidating being up in front of you guys and talking about some stuff that you guys deal with every day. And been riding with you guys a little bit and just see how capable, competent you guys are. And so be in this role is a little bit unusual. But Chief Ward asked me to talk about those things. And I think it is one of the things that we share in common is that we all interact with people in moments of crisis and tragedy. And what do we do in those moments? And if you flash back a number of years, when I was brand new at being a pastor, we got a call that there was a couple in the church and they were having their 3rd child, and they decided they wanted to have it at home with a midwife. And there was a condition that unfolded called placenta previa, and the child didn't make it and showed up at the hospital because she was transported and walked into the room, and there was this perfect baby boy who was not alive. And here's the mom in the bed and the dad sitting on the bed, and I walked in and now I'm in the official role of doing something here, trying to help. And I said virtually nothing. And most of it was just based out of the fear of saying the wrong thing, because everybody in those moments has the best of intentions. We all want to help, we all want to say the right thing, but I thought, man, if you blow it right now, they're going to remember that for the rest of their lives. And so this has really been a growth area for me. I think one of the things, that we probably all recognize is some of us operate very naturally out of the logical and rational side of our brain. Then there's the feeling side of the brain. And for me, I'm much more on the thinking, rational side than I am on the feeling side. And I think a lot of what we're talking about today of meeting people in the middle of crisis has to do with connecting with them on that feeling side. And so when tragedy just happens, and I put this into an acrostic that we're going to look at today because that's what pastors do, is do stuff like this. And call it SAD, maybe to help us remember when tragedy strikes. We're going to talk about things to say and things not to say. We're going to talk about affect. That's our appearance, our demeanor, how we come across, how we look, how we sound, all of that. And then things to do. And as I've been doing a little bit more research, especially in this role, being more in the moment of crisis there or immediately after that, I've come to discover this whole field actually has a name called psychological first aid. And so it's not hands-on physical first aid, but it's psychological first aid of helping people in moments of crisis. So the things that we say, just some principles that I've learned along the way. What you say doesn't matter as much as how you say it. People don't always quote you, but they can kind of remember what it sounded like and what it felt like to be on the receiving side of that. And there's a quote that I heard, not the biggest fan of Maya Angelou, but I agree with this. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And a lot of times, the specific words are not as important as the general approach with which we engage people. And this is kind of, in my moment of struggle there, something I come back to, that if we are, just living in fear of saying the wrong thing, I don't think, there's any rule or law that says we have to say anything. A lot of times, just even our presence is a help there. And so, if we're living in that space of doubt, know that we are not obligated to say something specific. But with that in mind, what do we say? What kind of things in moments of crisis, tragedy, are helpful and are good to say? This one is totally unoriginal. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm sorry that it happened. And you probably heard it, a million times, and yet it still is very, very effective. And I think what it does in that moment is it acknowledges what somebody is going through and acknowledges how serious their situation is. I wish I had the right words for such a hard time. And I think what that does is acknowledge that, we don't have any easy answers. We can't solve this for you. They're confused, they're distraught, and we, don't understand it all from an overall perspective. I don't know how you feel, but I'm here to help in any way that I can. And I think sometimes we want to project our feelings onto people, and we want to make it better for them. But in doing that, sometimes what we wind up doing is actually minimizing the value and the importance of what just happened, and chances are what they lost. This must be very difficult, and I can't truly understand what it must be like right now for you. You and your loved ones will be in my thoughts and prayers if that is something that you can own. And I think I've recognized in traveling with you guys that we're human beings, they're human beings, and to walk away from something like that, we're not just car mechanics, right? And we put on a new muffler, that there's something very, very serious that happened in somebody's life. And I think just to connect as human beings, even when we're in a specific role or in a specific position, can be a big help to them, that they know that we're human as well. If this is true, I think it's a good thing to say in those moments that you're safe now. But again, we have to know that that is indeed the reality. I'm glad you're talking to me now. It wasn't your fault. If there is no blame, that is known. And I'll be honest with you, in the times that I've met with people who are on the other side of somebody who has just committed suicide, here's what good people do in those moments. They look at themselves and they wonder, what should I, could I, would I have done? And they often blame themselves. And the reality is, in those moments, that it's not their fault. Now, could there be a scenario in which, there's a pretty strong connection? There might be. But I think in, 98% of those situations, people are blaming themselves for something that is not their responsibility, and not their fault. Your reaction is not an uncommon response to such a terrible thing. A lot of times, people are obviously distraught and they think they're either losing it, they're going crazy, or they don't know what to say or do in that moment. And I think to normalize that feeling and allow them the permission to be a little bit crazy and distraught in those moments is okay, because that is pretty normal, depending on what the situation is, and maybe to let them know that they're not going crazy. And things may never be the same, but they can get better. And I've been around a lot of situations, where they've lost somebody and they say it'll never be the same. And you know what? That's a true statement. But it's not the only thing that's true in that moment, and that there is some hope as they move forward. So if those are things to say, how about some things not to say, and why they might not be the best things to say in those moments? I understand. Often communicates to somebody, who's just walking into a situation. The reality is we don't understand what they're going through. It's their experience. We got to let them walk through it and let them have their experience. Anything that starts with "you're lucky that," you're lucky that that truck, only took out, one person, as opposed to everybody. In that moment of tragedy and crisis, they're not lucky. And I think I think that's tapping into the rational side of thinking, hey, it could have been a lot worse today, and a lot more people could be in that same situation, but they're not lucky. At least she lived a long life. Many people die young. Not great to say when somebody has passed away, and even if they have some years on them. These, by the way, are all real things that have been said on both sides of this ledger here. So these are not just theoretical things. He's in a better place. Now, being a person of faith myself, you might think, well, isn't that, a good thing to say in that moment? And I would say it's not, because again, what's happening and unfolding in that moment is what needs to be dealt with, and the other implications of what that might mean, that's for another day. But they need to be going through what that situation is in that moment. And the other thing, just with the spiritual things, if we are certain that we share the same spiritual beliefs, I think, we can very carefully walk down that road. But if we're not sure that we share the spiritual beliefs, that can be one of the worst things that we can do, is try to communicate things to them that are supposedly good news, but something that they're not owning in that moment can be a real negative. She brought this on herself. If only she hadn't drank so much, and not a great time to be placing blame. And again, I think that comes from the rational side rather than the feeling side. There's a reason for everything. I've come to the conclusion in this world there's not always a reason for everything. That there are some things that have no purpose, that have no positive meaning, that have no value. There's not always a reason for everything. And hopefully just a moment of levity here in a bit of what I'm sharing that's kind of heavy. My colleague Sammy Hagar is going to lighten the mood in a little bit. But I saw this one thing about there's a reason for everything, and hopefully you can appreciate my sixth sense of humor. Somebody said, yeah, there's a reason for everything, and sometimes the reason is you're dumb and you make stupid decisions. And so, sometimes there's a reason, but it's not always a good one. You'll be over this soon enough. In that moment, let's not talk about the end of when they're going to be done dealing with grief and tragedy. Everybody goes through that process at a different rate, and so to put any kind of a time frame on that is not going to be helpful. I can't believe this one has been said apparently a lot of times to usually a younger mom who has lost a child, is that you're young enough to have another child. That is not helpful in that moment. And again, everybody has the best of intentions, but in that moment what they're dealing with is the loss of a child. They don't want to know about the future. They want to, you know, just deal with what they're facing right in that moment. I know how you feel, and when my mother and friend or dog died, and here's how I felt, and all of that, and to compare our experience, and even if it is very similar to what they're going through in that moment, really devalues their own experience and lessens, you know, the impact of what they're going through. And even as similar as the circumstances might have been, everybody's experience of walking through tragedy is very unique. Don't worry, everything's going to be okay. I don't know that we can ever guarantee that, you know, to somebody who's going through something like that. Be strong for your children. I think in that moment it's okay to be going through it as you need to go through it. Calm down and try to relax. That is definitely somebody operating out of the rational side of their brain there, and in moments of crisis is not the thing that often comes naturally to us. Give people the permission to deal with it as they need to in that moment. Any questions about any of that, or any thoughts about any of that? Sound about right? All right, our affect. So this is how we come across, what we look like, sound like, and those kind of things. Remain calm no matter what the situation may be. Oftentimes people are not calm, and what they need is somebody who is calm. Just some things that have been found, you know, by folks who even study this thing, is that if you have an open posture, you're directly facing them, make eye contact with them and relax. One of the things that I've learned at church, and I've tried to really train myself not to do this. You know, we've got people there on Sunday morning, and if I'm talking to somebody and I'm looking them in the eye, and in the background there's all these people walking around, and I can be like, oh, I haven't seen them in a while, and oh, hey, there they are. And as I'm talking to this person, all of a sudden they're kind of getting this thing like they know that I'm not really engaged with them, and the outcome of that communicates lack of value to them, and that we're more interested in something that's happening around us. And so I think when we're engaged with somebody who is in the middle of tragedy, we really want to communicate. I am locked into you, I am listening to you, and I am seeking to communicate with you. Communicate warmth, I think that's a pretty obvious one. Especially communicate compassion based on what they're going through. A lot of times that's with soft tone. Smile when appropriate. I mean, we don't always want to be smiling when something really bad is still in the process of unfolding. Allow the person in crisis to dictate the distance between you. I don't know if you guys have that whole space thing going on. I just did the ancestry thing, you know, and one, I'm Germanic, which I already knew that, and we like a lot of space. Also found out I'm Scandinavian, which is Viking, right? And so even more space that's there. I heard once that the preferred amount of spacing for Germanic people is one person per room, so this is really intimidating for me right now. But everybody has a certain thing, and I think in moments of crisis, we don't want to be space invaders. We want to let them either get close or be distant, and, you know, kind of allow them to set that tone. Establish a relationship by introducing yourself as if they do not know you, and many times they don't. You know, we're meeting somebody for the first time in there, but make sure they understand exactly who you are. Ask them what they would like to be called. Don't shorten their name or use their first name without permission. And in some cultures, a lot of Asian cultures, Mr. and Mrs. Is very important, but I think just trying to understand who they are and meet them where they are. Use concrete questions to help the person to focus. Not a great time to ask open-ended questions, you know, so tell me about, you know, the things that matter to you in your life is not a great question. Yes or no is real helpful, because a lot of times they're not in that rational part of themselves. And so give them really clear and short questions to answer, closed-ended questions. Explain why you're asking the question. Sometimes the question we ask in moments of crisis can sound a little bit invasive. They're not, but good if they know why we're asking. Come to an agreement on something. Find something that you can establish some point of agreement and solidify a relationship that you are on their side, that you are seeking to work with them. Active listening will help find a point of agreement, find something that you can lean into, and just communicate that you are there to help. Not time limited, and I think that's one of the easy things we can do, is to try to shorten the experience that people are going through, whether it be in that moment or with tragedy in general, and we've just got to give people that opportunity to go at their own pace and to deal with it as they can. So what doesn't work with affect is don't try to fix the loss. There are some things that just can't be fixed, and when somebody's going through crisis, we cannot often go back and bring that person back. And sometimes we want to not just do that physically, but somehow we want to get them there rationally and talk them to a place where they understand it all, and that's not going to be real successful. Do not force people to share their stories with you, especially very personal details. It feels very invasive to them in that moment. Do not tell people what they should be feeling, thinking, and how they should have acted earlier. And this is one in marriages, right, where we might say to somebody, you shouldn't feel that way. And I think we can do that in moments of tragedy and crisis as well, is that we tell people that they shouldn't feel that way. I think we got to give them permission to feel whatever it is that they're feeling and still bring help that is going to lead them forward. Do not tell people why you think they have suffered by alluding to personal behaviors and beliefs of the victim. So again, if only he hadn't drank, his whole life, things would be so different. We don't want to cast any negative light on the person who has passed on that day. And don't make any promises that you can't keep. And sometimes we, out of just a desire to be helpful, will say that we'll either do something or we'll circle back, and if we have every intention of doing that, great. But if not, don't make any promises that we cannot keep. Do not criticize services and relief activities in front of people who need those services. So if there's somebody there, who maybe we think is not doing what they should be doing, that's not something for the people who are going through crisis to hear from us. We'll deal with that, somewhere else, and but not a helpful thing in those moments. So that's what to say and what not to say. Affect and now do, and these are pretty general. They're pretty broad, and again, the applications to it are probably going to depend and vary from situation to situation. So contact and engage. Safety and comfort, make sure that everybody is as safe as they can be and have what they need to feel comfortable. Stabilization, get the situation as under control as possible. Information gathering, find out what the needs are, the current concerns. Practical assistance, connect with a faith leader and the awesome Layton City Chaplain or other things, and I would say the things that are going to come below this, I think really are more the responsibility, because you guys are dealing with most of the things in the crisis of the moment and aren't necessarily there in the aftermath of that. But to think about connection with social support and linkage to collaborative services, and you're thinking, yeah, that'd be great, in some of the things that we go to, but I'm not going to see that person and circle back with that person. That's a great opportunity really to connect into, whether it be a chaplain or their faith leader, and a lot of people in Layton and Weber County are already connected to somebody, and so I think that can be a good step in those moments, because then these other things can happen with those who were there long, hours or even days after something very specific has unfolded. I got kind of chapter 2 here, and oh, go ahead.
One quick question, what about, one thing I know in the past I've done is offered to like make a phone call call somebody, or
Yep.
offered it if I need to notify somebody. You think that's appropriate to do that for them? Cause I'm somewhat, they say, no, I wanna call my sister and
Yeah.
tell her what happened, or I wanna call my, my son and tell him that's what happened, but, I know sometimes I've offered, can I make a phone call for you? Oh yeah, could you please call
Yep.
my mom and tell her what happened?
I think it's very appropriate, and I do that all the time. And one of the good outcomes of that, there was 19-year-old found deceased in his bedroom. And in talking with the family, another sibling was incarcerated, and they didn't think that he would be able to come for the service. And I said, hey, are there any calls that you can make? And they said, well, our other son is in prison down in southern Utah there, but we're pretty sure he can't come. I said, well, let me make a call. They released him and allowed him to come to the funeral service for his brother. So I think that's very appropriate. I think also, and again, this might be more for faith leader, chaplain thing, that if there are notifications that they don't want to make, we can sure help with that. So a lot of times they want to call immediate family, but if they have 70 calls to make or something like that, we can sure help out with that, because I don't think they want to relive that every time. And a lot of times as the circles get a little bit wider, they're okay with other people doing notifications. But that is one of the things that we're happy to help with on the other side of somebody's loss. Any other questions or thoughts? So chapter 2 of what I'm going to be talking about this morning, right? So this is, the first part was, all of us kind of out there. But what about the people who are first responders, who deal with all this stuff on a regular basis? What's going on in here with us, and what are some of the things that could be helpful, either in identifying, some issues with that, or some help with that? Where can that be found? And a little bit, my own background. My dad was a volunteer fireman for 18 years back on the East Coast, and so I've always had just an appreciation and respect for what you guys do, and that was always there. But the thing that really triggered getting involved in volunteering as a chaplain here is I was running the 2013 Boston Marathon the year the bombs went off, and back at the hotel watching first responders deal with, legs that are blown off and everything else that happened there that day. It just sort of hit me, how devastating this whole thing is, but who's got these guys back? They're dealing with some stuff that, is like war, right? And who helps them? And so that's back in the day when I got in touch with Chief Ward. And it's really led me to think about, how do you deal with that stuff, and how does, all of that, get processed, and how do we move in a positive direction? Just some things I found out. 55% of first responders believe seeking any mental help will make their supervisor treat them differently. So we fear that there's a negative outcome from that. 45% said bringing up mental health concerns at work will make their coworkers see them as being weak. 34% said starting discussions about mental health concerns at work will reduce their chances of earning a promotion. And just got that off the web there. Those numbers are higher than I thought that they would be, and maybe that's not a surprise for you, but it was a little bit higher than I thought it would be. According to the United States Fire Administration Stress Management Model Program for Firefighter Well-Being Report, that's a really long title. Stress is one of the most serious occupational hazards in the fire service, affecting health, job performance, career, decision-making, morale, and family life. Emotional problems, as well as problems with alcohol and drugs, are becoming increasingly evident. High rates of attrition, divorce, occupational disease, and injury continue. This would also be true of law enforcement, EMS, and emergency communications personnel. There is a stress that comes along with those roles that has an impact. According for the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the duties that accompany being a first responder can lead to 3 types of stress. One is day-to-day, and that's kind of what we all go through. That's just life and family and job and paying bills and all that kind of stuff. Cumulative chronic stress or strain caused by the accumulation of these daily stresses, where It's working with new people, changes in job routine, introducing difficult new systems or procedures. And then here's the one, though, that you guys deal with: critical incident stress or shock caused by exposure to traumatic or extreme incidents out of the norm, such as witnessing an accident, injury, or death, or being in the immediate aftermath of those things. Unchecked long-term exposure to any of these types of stress, but especially the third one, leads to post-traumatic stress symptoms. We'll talk a little bit about what those look like. Burnout or compassion fatigue, that's where you just got nothing left in the tank to really care and connect with people who just wrung out. Anxiety on an ongoing basis, depression, pathological grief, pathological meaning we just don't get over it, it's just always there. Interpersonal conflict, such as family or marital problems.
Hey, Roy?
Yep.
Go back one. You guys, I want to talk about compassion fatigue for a minute, and tell you how I have it. When, I've done this, this job for as long as I've done it, and then I started working in the emergency room, and I found myself having, I never really heard of that word before, or that kind of term, but I found myself having compassion fatigue. Seeing the same person every single day, coming in for, I'm allergic to everything except for that one drug that starts with a D, and I can, I have to have 2 milligrams of it, and my compassion went away, like big time. And I actually found myself going home at night after shifts and stuff like that, and telling and passing on my lack of compassion to people at home or here, telling stories about, are you kidding me, and type of stuff like that. That's real. And if you guys haven't seen it or felt it in your own selves, just kind of think about it, because I think even the newest person in the room can say that at one point or the other they've heard about it or talked about it, because it's real. So.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that phrase necessarily either before this, and I think, even in what we do, we meet a lot of times with people in off hours whenever they can meet, and there are times where you're leaving the house and you just think, I don't even want to do this and really don't care about the people that I'm about to go and see, which isn't exactly what we're shooting for. But yeah, when you're given, sometimes you can feel like the needle is on it, for sure. PTSD and acute stress disorder signs, what kind of things might indicate that? Flashbacks, nightmares, recurring thoughts. You guys have been doing this a lot longer than I have. You've seen a whole lot more than I have. But there was a tough incident that I was called out on with an 8-month-old who passed away in a recliner. I can close my eyes and see him on the floor with the father kneeling over him, still waiting for the medical examiner to come. And recently, his 12-year-old boy can see him laying on the floor there. And I think some of that, being able to still see it, is just natural. But I think, especially when it comes on without us going there and rethinking that and remembering that, that's the difference. That it's kind of an unwelcomed intrusion into our thought life, where we just can't get that thought out of our mind, is when it becomes problematic. Emotional numbness, that you just kind of go blank, that not happy, not sad, not much of anything anymore. Extreme worry, guilt, anger, and hopelessness. Avoidance of people, places, or things that are reminders of the trauma. Sometimes we go by a place where something happened and it causes us to remember, or there's a scenario that's very similar to something that was very difficult for us. It can bring back a lot of those memories. Loss of interest in things that once gave pleasure. They don't do their hobby anymore. They're just kind of checked out of a lot of the rest of life. Feeling anxious, on edge, jumpy, startling easy. It's kind of how I am in the morning when Jimmy comes in. His office is next to mine. It's very shocking. Sleep issues, and a lot of times it's not sleeping at all. Rarely is it the other direction, that we sleep too much. A lot of times sleep is interrupted and becomes a non-issue. problems with alcohol, drugs, or food become a way to kind of just numb and deal with those issues. Alcohol, part of my life growing up, especially as a teenager, and a lot of it for me was escape and was just numbing whatever it was that was going on. And when we're dealing with something, very real and very painful in our lives, it becomes a very easy option for us to turn in that direction. It hurts in the morning, but at least for that period of time, we got a little bit of relief and a little bit of escape. And we wonder, well, okay, with those things that are there, how long before it really becomes maybe something that we want to give serious thought about, whether, it's in ourselves or somebody around us, somebody that we care about. About a month after the specific trauma happens is probably a good gauge, give or take, that if we haven't been able to process that, deal with that, move beyond that, probably a good, time frame to begin thinking about what help is available. Acute stress disorder, PTSD symptoms and behaviors, disassociation from self, you're just not the same person that you used to be, your personality kind of goes flatline for the most part. Again, emotional numbing, just don't feel a whole lot of things, reduced awareness of surroundings, deep personalization, kind of just a zombie a little bit, walking through life. Amnesia, and what that means specifically with trauma is re-experiencing the traumatic event over and over again and not wanting to, it just is brought onto you. Avoiding distressing thoughts, feelings, and external reminders. You just, I'm not going to walk into that situation because I think that situation might take me back to something else that was very difficult, and I'm not trying to relive that. Blaming self or others due to distorted sense of reality. Loss of interest in activities, inability to remember key aspects of a traumatic event. It just kind of almost becomes like a blank space there, and things that we aren't even able to recall. Aggressive, reckless, or self-destructive behavior. Somebody becomes much more of a risk taker maybe than they used to be, kind of living on the edge, even of hurting themselves. And then sleep disturbances, and we already talked about that. Hypervigilance, they're just always like the adrenaline is pumping 100 miles an hour. So protective and resiliency factors against trauma. So what helps, especially folks who deal with it on a regular basis, what helps? This list is a little bit on the short side, and maybe we can talk about some other things that are available too. But sense of community, feelings of belonging, and emotional attachment. And a lot of times, when I've been here or one of the other stations, I say, I've asked this question, how do you guys deal with it? And that's the answer I've gotten, and I think it was Brad the last time I was here was talking about, yeah, we come back here and we talk about it. And studies show that there's huge help because of a couple reasons. One, when you say, hey, I'm not going to talk to this person or that person because they don't understand what it's like. And a lot of times that's true. Nobody really knows what it's like for you guys to do what you do. And so to try to share that with somebody who doesn't understand, but you guys do understand. And so the connection, the camaraderie, the talking through those experiences, studies have shown actually helps. And so, to come back here after whatever it is and have a debrief or talk to an individual or a group together, that is a positive way to process some of the trauma that helps. Collective sense of competence, the perception of the group's ability to accomplish its major tasks. So when you leave a tragedy and now kind of your official work is done, internally, it's a very different experience to walk out of that place and say, you know what, we were trained properly, we know what we were doing, we did everything right, we did the best that we could, and even if the outcome is not good, having that collective sense that we did everything that was within our capabilities helps a lot of processing that trauma. It's been impressive to me. I don't know, I can't compare Layton City with anywhere else because it's the only place I've been a chaplain. But almost every time that I show up somewhere, there's some type of training that's going on. And that's awesome. Because I think just that ongoing sense of training that, when you're out there dealing with something difficult, to say, we were well trained, we did everything that we could, is a lot better than walking away from a situation that didn't turn out well and you're thinking, boy, I hope, we did our best today. And maybe there was something else. Just my kind of newcomer, outsider assessment is that the competence and confidence level in Layton City is high. And I think a lot of that is due to training and that very factor there of people feeling like, hey, we can go do the best job possible. And then there's also the individual sense of competence, the ability to exercise some measure over their control. So this is now not just the group, but now is the individual person who feels that they are best equipped to be able to deal with whatever comes up. Positive coping strategies, ability to manage stress constructively, and a lot of that, has to do just with, how we deal with those. Compassion, satisfaction, and that is, a positive feeling from helping others. And I think there's a big part of life in this community that if you don't get a lot of satisfaction from helping people, my guess is you won't be doing it for long term. That there are other things that you can do, but if it doesn't give you some internal sense that, yeah, we had a bad one there, but you know what, there was that other one that was a good one, and the days in which we did show up and we helped and it made a difference and somebody's alive because we were there, and the internal sense of satisfaction that brings is a positive aspect on the days when it's difficult and it didn't go well, to say, hey, yeah, you can't win them all and you can't save them all.
One more on this one here, guys, real quick. This is big. There's some of us in the room, Luke, Joel, Sean Smith, a couple others. We had that bad call many years ago. I've kind of passed it on. Craig Easel, that mom, she always sends us a card every anniversary of the thing. A kid whacked his head when he was 16 years old. That was a bad trauma. He just had twins. And I remember passing that on to Luke and Sean and Joel just not too long ago. That's pretty big right there. That's a win. That's one that I can go back to a lot. And there's a lot more people than just us, but we started it by rolling on that scene and getting out of there quick. So, and that kid's life is much different now because, maybe not because of us, but partly because of us. So it's a good win. So take those small wins that you always hear about and bank them away.
And for whatever it's worth, if anybody ever wants to chat, I'm willing and able to do that, and whatever we talk about is kind of privileged as far as I'm concerned, and so that's just available. And then there's also the EAP, which
Correct.
you want to say a little bit about that, Kevin?
You guys know we have our EAP program through the city, that the city provides for us. People will just, whatever the cards are up on the wall right here, there, for the form there. So take advantage of it. It's something that city wants us to if we need it, and it's not just for you, it's family members as well, too. So, and it's, of course, all confidential.
Any other questions and thoughts? I'm kind of at the end of my slides there.
I think part of the big thing we do, I'll speak for me when we come back, even if it is a bad call, things don't go right, our humor, even though it may not be understood outside of our circle of people, but we tend to joke and I wouldn't call it making light, but it's how we deal with things. And that's important, to trust the guys that you're with and around, to be able to have that moment. And the serious talks come too, but feeling safe enough with your people to be able to talk, whether it is off humor or somebody that's struggling with something, to be able to trust your people that it's okay to be, you're not weak, you're not, most of this, for me, the mental game of here, it's not the calls. That's what we do. A lot of the emotional, the stresses and stuff come from the people we work with. I mean, our interactions, we spend more time here than we do with our families. So when you walk away from a situation, whether it's good or bad, like those are the things that pile up that if we're not taken care of. I've had partners come to me and I've gone to partners with that, what the hell, man? And bounce it back and forth, but you gotta be able to work it out.
Yeah.
We're all here, we all
That's called gallows humor.
Yeah.
If you look at it and pull it up, that's what you do. You try to, sometimes guys do find the levity in it, you know,
I've also heard it referred to as dark humor. And studies are also showing that dark humor is necessary in the role that you guys have. Doctors also use it quite a bit, you know, because not everybody makes it in their profession either. And it's actually a healthy way to create some distance between you and that, so you're not taking every one of those bad things upon yourself. And I think, yeah, you talked about something really important, Brandon, that especially in that first point, right, that you guys are in this together, and to be able to do that together in kind of a safe environment is huge.
We're a herd together, and we go through the good just as much as the bad. I can bring anything you want back to work. But it really is, we gotta be able to perform together, and that's good to bad. We've had personal talks with one another, we have them as a group.
Yeah. And this is always my guess, but you guys, you know, can obviously tell me more about this. My guess is you have a bad day, bad call, you don't want to bring that home on a regular basis, because that just kind of brings some heaviness, you know, onto your loved ones, you know, that you're probably not looking to do. So where do you go with that? I think, you know, the most likely option for that is the people who do understand it better than anybody else does.
Roy, you and I talked about it when you were up there last week, though, that can be a problem too. I mean, if you go home and you don't talk about anything, and, you know, that can certainly cause a gap between yourself and your spouse. You know, if they don't, I don't know, that's probably a topic for another day, but.
Well, and so Kyle, how would you balance that of not being too dark, but being open? How do you?
I haven't figured it out yet, I'm on my second divorce.
And our humor comes out.
There it is.
Well, part of, for me, it's helped now, unfortunately, it's after the fact, is the EAP, it's helped, you know, using that for myself, I'm not ashamed to say I used it, it was a beneficial thing for me, so. Talking about it with somebody and involving your spouse maybe in some of those sessions where you know, like I said, for me, I just felt like when things got really heavy here, the last thing I wanted to do is take it home and dump it on her, because it was hurting me, so why would I want to take something home if it hurts me, it'll hurt her, and instead of, you know, I started, I talked to you about it, I distanced myself quite a bit from my family and my wife, and certainly didn't handle that the right way, so, you know, I just bring that up because it's happened to me, it could happen to anybody else here, and I think it's an important thing to recognize that they need to be involved in a process sometimes too.
So I still vividly remember my very first traumatic call that I went on when the guy passed away. And I had a very good officer at the time, Battalion Chief Moss, that works at South Davis Metro. He was a captain at the time. And he told me, don't go around the corner, you don't need to see this, don't go around the corner. And I went around the corner and I looked, and he said, when I tell you not to do something, don't do something. And then he kind of took me under his arm and he said, there are times when you will go on calls and you will do things and there's nothing you can do. And there's nothing you can do to prepare yourself for what you're going to see, what you're going to experience. And he said, you don't need to accumulate any more skeletons than you have to accumulate. And so he said, keeping those under wraps, and he goes, I tell you that because I want you to pass that on to others. So when you get the opportunity to train somebody, to work with somebody, to be compassionate for them and to be a good officer. And so I think for me, I learned very young in my career that to have a good officer take you under the wing and then to pass that on, to do that with a coworker, to do that with your partner on an ambulance, when you can tell that something, they're not right, all of a sudden they're not talking, they're not communicating, or they're distant, that you need to go approach that person and talk to them immediately, and not in a negative way, but just in a compassionate way, in a way that you care for your brotherhood and your sisterhood. And it was impactful for me, and I still remember that call, but it wasn't a bad thing now. It was important, and I look up to him for that, so.
And that sounds almost identical to the situation Kyle was telling me when he was a young firefighter, and he's a captain, I think, right?
No, actually, it was a guy who never wanted to promote, Doug Robinson, everyone here knows him and respects him, but he walked me through a particularly difficult call for sure.
I think too, though, the one thing about taking that home, I think it does depend on how much your spouse really, sometimes they wanna know. They wanna say, they can tell, I mean, you know, I've been doing this a long time, and my wife could tell, especially in Arizona, where it was unfortunately a routine thing to deal with a lot of drownings, and she knew, just when I came home, the way that I kinda loved on the kids a little bit more, that she knew, oh, you must have had a bad call, oh yeah, had another 2-year-old drowning. So you're hugging your kids just a little tighter. And I think that's one thing, is that we just gotta take that positive side of it, and of all people, we should appreciate life more than anybody, because we see so much death, and, especially with PD, inhumanity to man, as we call it. That's a tough deal, so, getting to where when we get home, we look at the positive side of getting away from that, to say, man, look what we have, look at the relationship that I have, and my kids that I can have, so I think it depends on your spouse. I would agree with the same thing about included. I've been fortunate to have a wife that really used to be in the medical field and really kind of liked it for me to kind of process that and talk about it, and she could tell, and it got emotional sometimes talking to her about it, which was a good thing.
And somebody a few weeks ago told me they just walked in the door at home, and their wife said, "What happened?" They just knew. And
True.
so I think it depends, right,
Absolutely.
on what you share, based on a lot of things.
So, I think one thing too, for our personal health, is trying to figure out what refills our tank. As far as, you see it when you first get in this job, that's all we think about is the fire. Guys working 2 or 3 different jobs, trying to make money, also trying to be more involved doing stuff. But there's a time and place, we have our leave to step away and go out and find a hobby that, you get to figure out why you work is to play. And I say that, in a way, my family will always say, we work hard, we play hard. And that is to refill that tank that we have, and the joy of life. Life is so precious, and we see it day in, day out. And it's amazing, we see how precious and how short it could be, we forget about it. We don't know what's going to happen the next day. So enjoy the days you do have, especially with your loved ones and your friends, and try to find a way to kind of refill your tank. So when you do come back to work, you can kind of come with that energy that you first brought to the job.
Is that why you coach?
Yeah, sometimes.
There you go. Yeah, I have a dual sport motorcycle. It was part of recharging.
Yeah, and I think, I know Ben, a lot of us in here ride, do a lot of stuff like that, you can talk to Ben goes to church up on the mountain when it snows. He's the most giddy person I've ever seen with a snowstorm. So, everyone knows. So, but I think that's very important for us to, we get so used to taking care of other people, and sometimes you have to take care of yourself, and that is stepping away and making that time for yourself. And if that's just by yourself, or with your loved ones, or with your friends or something, while I was hanging out off duty too, and try to find, get those conversations away from the station too, and recharge as a person. So you don't run into the, the lack of compassion. So.
You'll be happy this weekend, Ben. Big one coming.
He already brought a snowmobile.
He's ready.
Why would I take it out?
I don't know how you get it in there sometimes.
Well, I'm going to turn the time over here to my colleague, Jimmy.
Yeah, take a quick break, we'll switch over.
Yep, and Jimmy's gonna lighten the mood for us here after all that heaviness stuff.
Is that still on?
Yes.
Can we get rid of that? Can we try and get rid of that?
Yeah, go ahead, I don't know how.
It's on this other
I've tried the other one.
Cause I was making sure I was.
Tomatoes.
Making sure.
That one time Mariah was helping me clean my car. We were going on a trip. There was like probably 25 50%. That's not even an exaggeration. Like it was in the 20s. I was hoping for Chick-fil-A.
Oh, what did I do?
It's got a crack. So, yep.
Don't even look at it.
You know, the choir boys used to call it Elk City.
I got more. More will grow in and take it out. It don't matter.
Oh, jeez.
That's gonna be cost prohibitive.
Really?
What ERS is gonna take off the bill. Right now it's at 85, $80.
We spent a lot of time.
And again, that's, they don't know.
It really is,
Interesting. Interesting. Can I stop? Is there a pause on this?
I think so. I think I just go out, just stop it and start it over. And there's only, I think,
But their benefits are good, so that really is